The World Ends With You is a JRPG that released in 2007. The game performed pretty poorly, selling only 800,000 units, which is a pretty low number considering the DS sold 150 million units worldwide. It became a fairly niche game with a small yet loyal fanbase, but it ultimately drained in the flow of mainstream media. But it's popped up again, because it's gotten a sequel 14 years after its original release. Neo: The World Ends With You is getting a little bit of buzz on social media, and if you clicked in this video, then you've probably seen it and are curious as to whether or not it's worth your time. I imagine the big question will be, do I need to play the first game to understand the sequel? Short answer, no. But stick with me, just hear me out. So yeah, there's no way Square Enix would fund and publish a game that requires you to play a DS game from 2007 that hardly anyone touched. That would be a huge financial flounder. However, I'm here to make the argument that you should play The World Ends With You, regardless of the sequel. I think it's an experience any JRPG fan should give a try, since there's really nothing else quite like it. Sure, not many have played it, but look at the review scores. Those who gave it the time loved this game. Anyway, I'm sure you get the gist of what I'm saying, so just sit down for a second and let me persuade you to play The World Ends With You. First things first, what's this game about? Well, The World Ends With You story revolves completely around the Shibuya area of Tokyo. The game opens with our protagonist, Neku, who likes to distance himself from others since he's pretty edgy and thinks other people and their conflicting views are nothing but a nuisance. Before long, he realizes he's been transferred into what's known as the Reaper's Game. What's the best way to say this? The Reaper's Game is a type of sport that those who die in Shibuya are entered into for another chance at life. The game lasts for 7 days and the players must complete a mission each day within a time limit to survive. By day 7, any remaining players are granted their life back. Of course, the Reaper's Game features Reapers, who perform various activities like blocking players' routes with tasks and creating creatures called Noise, who are the enemies that you battle throughout the game. There's also the added mystery of who the composer of this game even is, and also you just get to experience the suspense of which players will actually make it to the end. The final detail is that in order to participate in the game, a player needs to form a pact and partner up with another player, which for the people hating Neku is easier said than done. Maybe that was a lot to take in. But you try to explain the plot of any JRPG to someone who hasn't played it and see how stupid you look. The plot really shines in its characters, particularly in the players Neku ends up partnering with and seeing how they end up shaping him into a different person. Obviously, I can't say too much on this without going into spoiler territory, but it's nice to see the characters change their protagonist rather than it being the other way round like in so many other games. I hope I was able to sell you on that plot. I'm a big fan of it, but you really need to experience it for yourself rather than just be told about it. The main thing that makes this game stand out from other JRPGs is its unconventional control method. The game has you control Neku on the bottom screen and your partner character on the top screen. Neku fights with pins that he finds throughout the Reaper's Game that grant him different abilities. There's pins that let you spread fire everywhere, freeze the area with huge icicles, lift surrounding objects into the air with telepathy, and then just drop them on enemies and watch stuff explode. There's so many different pins that I can't even begin to list them all. But rest assured, there's definitely plenty out there that'll suit your playstyle. How do you use these pins? Well, each pin has a specific stylus movement that activates its ability. For example, you can hold the stylus down and drag it across the screen to spread flames with the fire pin, or slash across cars to send them crashing into enemies with the telepathy pin. With an icicle pin, you can drag upwards across an empty area to shoot up a tower of ice and slam it into enemies. Again, there's a lot of different stylus movements for different pins, and it'll be up to you to experiment with them. On top of this, you also move Neku around with the stylus, and if you swipe quickly to a certain area, he'll dash straight over there, which is a great dodging method. You can equip up to 6 pins, and those pins all have their own individual XP stats, so they grow stronger and change as you progress through the game. The best part about wielding pins is definitely building a set of pins that all complement each other and are optimal for your unique playstyle. Okay, now let's talk about controlling your partner on the top screen. Well, you control your partner with the D-pad, or the ABXY buttons if you're left-handed and weird. Pressing on the D-pad reveals a map of symbols next to the character. Pressing more directions will let you move across the map, and the character will let out a flurry of attacks as you do so. This map branches into 3 directions with different symbols at the end. Let's use Shiki's playstyle as an example here. The routes in her map end with shapes. At the top of her screen, you'll see 3 cards. Each card has a symbol that corresponds with the shapes on her attack map. If you can guess and remember which symbol is on each card, then you can pick the route to the symbol on the indicated card, and if you reach the end of the route, the card will be revealed. Finally, if you reveal all the cards, Shiki and Neku can team team up and release a super attack onto the enemy Noise. It's also worth mentioning the direction of Shiki's attacks will be dictated by which route you choose. You can pick the upper route to attack enemies in the air, and I'm sure you can work out how it goes from there, and I don't need to explain the rest. Another detail is that sometimes you can get a little preoccupied with controlling Neku. For situations like this, the partner character will switch into autoplay mode, so they don't get their ass beat whilst your attention is elsewhere. Okay, I get that the last part of the explanation was pretty confusing and may make the game seem a little bit intimidating, but the game gives you ample opportunity to learn how it all works, and the tutorial even tells you to not feel pressure to learn all of this at once, which is pretty nice of them. If you want my top tip on how to learn the battle mechanics, I tell you to switch the difficulty to easy and turn your level up to the max to allow a lot of room for error in the early battles. After a while, you can switch back to normal mode, and I promise you will notice a significant improvement in your skill once you've given yourself the necessary breathing space to learn everything. Just remember this one thing: how high or low you set your level affects the drop rates of certain items, so if you get to a point where you need to hunt for an item to progress, make sure you turn your level down, otherwise you'll be searching for a long time. Obviously, there's all the usual JRPG stats stuff with equipable items that increase your attack and defense and all that. Just do me a favor and make sure you always give your character meals as soon as you get the opportunity to do so. Meals permanently buff stats, but need to be digested over a few battles before the buffs take effect. The reason I tell you this is that you can only give your character one meal per day, and if you get to a point in the late game where your stats are too low, it'd suck to wait a few days for your characters to level up. I guess you could just alter the time in your DS, but you still have to battle a lot to digest them, so there's a bit of grinding you could avoid if you just take my advice here. My point is, give your character a meal every day you play the game. It's that simple. Oh, here's the cool thing about this game. If you're someone who can't play games too often, The World Ends With You gives your pins XP every time you boot up the game, and the longer you spend away from the game, the more XP you're gonna get. This is just a feature I thought was pretty neat and helpful for people who can't play consistently enough to completely familiarize themselves with the gameplay. I hope now you get what I mean about The World Ends With You having unique gameplay. That's a big thing I love about this game. It felt like something new, despite it being released 14 years ago. I love the types of games I normally play, but I was looking for something fresh, and I definitely found it here. But here's a question. Who would I say this game is for? Well, I think it's a no-brainer for any JRPG fan. Seems like an essential pick to me. But I'd extend it to pretty much anyone who likes a single-player story-based campaign. Even if JRPGs aren't your thing, this game is so different to what JRPGs typically are that it may not even feel like one to you. It's for anyone looking for something original and creative. Not to mention the art style and the music both go hard and really well together. As for the story, it has a great message, which I'd like to talk about in a bit. Well, when I say I'd like to talk about it, I mean Silas under the influence would like to talk about it, if you know what I mean. So I'd appreciate it if you'd stick around for that. But let me answer another question. Where should you play this game? You see, The World Ends With You received a final remix on the Nintendo Switch, with updated graphics and music. Sounds pretty good, right? Well, no, not really. Thinking back to what I described with the battle gameplay, seems pretty dependent on the DS's unique form factor, right? Given that there's no touchscreen to use when the Switch is docked, you have to resort to motion controls to use Neku's pins. This is just not ideal, as the motion controls of the Joy-Cons are nowhere near as accurate as a DS screen and stylus. On top of this, the camera has to switch between Neku and his partner, as you only have one screen to work with. This makes the experience way less seamless, as you can't control the two characters simultaneously, and they're stuck with this awkward camera movement as a substitute. It's a little better in handheld mode, but you had to put the Switch up on a stand for the best stylus experience, and then when it switches to the partner character, you gotta pick up the Switch to use the D-pad comfortably. This means you're gonna have to change how you position the console multiple times in one battle. So clearly, the DS is the way to go here. Well, yeah, but since The World Ends With You is a niche product, the game can be a little pricey. But here's a Silas OS top tip. R4 cards are much cheaper, so buy one of those. If you're against the piracy of old games, touch some grass or something, I can help you. Maybe you don't have a DS though. Well, you're in luck. A DS Lite is also a very easy thing to find for a low price on eBay. I mean, they sold over 100 million of those things. We're not exactly suffering from a DS shortage. In fact, chances are you can get a DS Lite and an R4 card together for cheaper than the recommended retail price of the Switch version. So there, I've given you no excuses. I don't want to hear him. Okay. I'm gonna talk about the cool message of the story and why it's relevant now more than ever, as portrayed by the intoxicated mind of Silas OS. We live in a world where we can very easily regulate who we interact with, since a lot of our interactions take place on social media, especially now thanks to this pandemic. This means we can basically surround ourselves with people who think the exact same things as us and effectively bar ourselves from any confrontation whatsoever. Now, some of you may like that kind of haven, but I promise you that it's negative. Sheltering yourself from opposing views prevents you from growing mentally and just stunts any potential your ideals could reach. Sure, it may be easy, but do you really want to limit yourself like that? I hope not. In recent years, we have seen firsthand the negative effects of this type of behavior. People have become so unaccustomed to a differing view that when they do run into one, the go-to response is pure outrage. There's so much shouting between people on each side, both not being able to comprehend that other people are different. This has ultimately led to some extremely unfortunate large-scale events that I won't mention because of the YouTube algorithm, but I'm sure you can think of some for yourself. All of this is because people have been refusing to take into account and consider other points of view. Now, I know that I was talking about a DS JRPG just a moment ago, so let me link all this back to that. The World Ends With You's protagonist, Neku, is guilty of the same thing. He believes that he shouldn't bother with strangers, as they all think differently to another, and these differences can only lead to hurt or betrayal. He'd rather stay in his own little bubble, where everything is as he wants it to be. But Neku is forced to work with partners, and over time they broaden his horizons, change his point of view, and end up improving him as a person. What Neku learns is exactly what a lot of people online need to hear today. Meeting and interacting with others who think differently and have had different experiences is the only way you can reach your full potential as a person. It's part of being human. But the freedom of regulation in social media is taking that away, even more so now that the majority of most people's social lives revolve around the internet. This applies on an individual and group basis as well. If different sides could just interact and at least try to understand how they both feel, then everyone can move forward together. It's a pretty hefty message for a DS game to preach, and obviously it's far from the best way to get this message to people, but it's plain to see that the story of this game has aged like fine wine. I mean, the teachings of the game's story is why I'd recommend it to any JRPG fan now more than ever. I just really like what the writers had to say, so please, give it a go. To sum it all up, we can only grow as much as we allow ourselves to. You set your own borders. And I'm sorry to have to end the video on this corny line, but the best way to say it is that the world ends with you. And what the fuck was I drinking?